first and foremost by U.S. military.
This could be a good assessment is if there's an ET race that's a million years ahead of us in technology, it's not reasonable for them to come all these light years away to our
kind of disposable probe almost.
Absolutely. A lot of these I think are unmanned. We can go over some of the cases tonight as we get into the material, but yeah, absolutely. There's a number of cases where military personnel, they're examining this crap. There's no seats, there's no display panels, certainly no signs of living quarters, no sense of any beings inside whatsoever. So they're antiseptically sterile on the inside.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And also we sort of see a lot of connection between certain locations, maybe nuclear sites or sensitive areas. Does that pattern cross over into kind of the crash retrieval area as well?
Yeah, I think it does, because if you look at the Leonard Stringfield cases, primarily they're on the west. They're near New Mexico, they're Arizona, they're California, they're near their 509th bomb group, they're near Los Alamos. So they seem to be centered around these nuclear atomic energy commission sites and nuclear sites, missile silos. So a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is primarily centered around the west coast of the United States, or at least in the southwestern states. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense, definitely. And do you think that potentially some of these crash retrievals may actually involve secret government experiments rather than extraterrestrial craft?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're dealing with the varsity team here. We're dealing with an intelligence military complex that are experts at what they do. I mean, these people will stop at nothing to muddy the waters, to make you think that we're dealing with an ET craft, when in point of fact, we're dealing with a military classified black program paid for by sinister means, no congressional oversight, no public scrutiny. They're devoid and completely absolved of any FOIA requests, so you can't drill down on these things. When you have a private defense contractor program and it's not paid for by the American taxpayer, there's no amount of FOIA requests that you can send in to get any data on it. And so that's really what we're up against. And that's why the cover-up has been in place for over 80 years, because we're dealing with the varsity team. This is a mob group on another level. Absolutely.
So in that would kind of point to there being dedicated government agencies who have crash retrieval teams and potentially in private industry as well. Would that be the case?
Yeah, well, the dirty deal that they cut, when the government started retrieving these things, and keep in mind that the government doesn't do anything at all. What they do is they subcontract out to other defense contractors. So when these things came down, regardless of how they came down, their first order of business is to cut a deal with the defense contractors. And they said, we don't care what you need to do. Okay. We don't care how you do it. We don't care what you do. And you're free and clear to privatize this, and you can commercialize it, and you can have trickle down technology and make billions off of it. All we want to know is the technology and the propulsion/weapon system applications. Anything else we don't care about. You can do whatever you want. That's the dirty deal that the government made with the defense contractors. And that's been the case for 80 years now, clearly. That's what's going on. And this thing is deep, it's dark, it's sinister. The funding is sinister. It goes into avenues that I don't even want to explore. That's out of my realm for sure.
Sure. And do you think or to what level do you think the private industry have been successful in reverse engineering these craft? Do you think they're able to manufacture them to the same level as kind of the others?
Well, there's two trains of thought. One train of thought is, even after all this time, they still don't know how these things work. That's just one thing. And maybe there's some truth to that. On the other side, we have the multi-billion-dollar classified black budget we're talking probably, the numbers in the early 80s were 22.4, and then it went to 86, and then, it keeps on going up. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that are off the books. And this has been going on for 80 years. So let's just do a round number. If you throw $100 billion per year at black programs, and this is over like a 70-year time frame, you're gonna get something for your money. You are. And the witness testimony from military witnesses is telling us that they have made a breakthrough, that we do have man-made UFOs, and that at the very latest, the breakthrough was made October 1954. That's a very conservative number. I'm sure the number goes earlier back in time, but we can pinpoint the divide, where it diverged to October 1954. So at least by that time, this stuff went operational, and they have been able to mimic the form, fit, and function of what we would term an ET spacecraft. They've now reached the point where you can't tell the difference. Is it live or is it Memorex? You can't tell. They are that good now, and they paid for it by our own tax dollars.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that potentially some of these kind of big famous cases that we all love, basically, do you think some of them genuinely are ours? Maybe
Absolutely.
like the Tic Tac or things like that.
Absolutely. And our pilots, they don't have a need to know. They don't have a high enough security clearance. So how would they know? They might claim it's ET, and they might think it's ET, and they might be 100% convinced it is ET. But how are they going to know what's going on in the bowels of Air Force Plant 42? How would they know? They don't have a need to know. They're just very good Navy pilots, but they're not clear to know what's going on at Air Force Plant 42. That's a whole different level. And we're looking at a blue on blue situation where our pilots are chasing after our own assets, and they don't even know it. That's what we're doing here.
And does it surprise you to any degree that the people that have worked on these over the years, that we've not had any kind of leak to kind of point it to that, to kind of prove that it is ours?
Well, there have been leaks, and if you look at the trade publications from the mid 1950s, they were all the whole rage was about anti-gravity propulsion systems, atomic powered spacecraft, atomic powered rocket engines, anti-gravity for a better term, desperately trying to break the gravity barrier. That's what all of the mid 1950s is all about. Essentially, after 55 timeframe, it was expunged from the literature. But this is clearly what the legacy newspaper clippings are telling us, that multiple defense contractors in conjunction with universities were desperately trying to crack the gravity barrier. That's what they were doing. And they've done it. They've absolutely done it.
I mean, obviously Roswell is kind of the most well-known case involving a crashed UFO. Throughout the years and all your research into Roswell, what, if you could kind of just give us a brief overview of what actually happened back in July of 1947.
Yeah. Well, timelines were critical, but Bill McDonald has done a very good job. He's a very good researcher. He's basically pinned it down to July 4th, 1947 at around 11:59 p.m. Some say it was 11:30, but certainly July 4th, 1947. Now, there's two other trains of thought that 5 bodies were recovered and 1 was still alive. Bill seems to think that the number was higher than that, like 7 bodies were recovered, 1 was still alive. Bottom line is there was a survivor. So it sat out there for the night of the 4th, the 5th, the 6th. It wasn't until the night of the 7th, the early morning of the 8th, that the military got involved. So those bodies were already decomposing for days before the military got there. They eventually cleaned up the location. There were more than one event, because we have a touchdown site, we have a debris field, we have a second body site, and we have the impact site. So actually there's 4 components to Roswell. So once they retrieved the material on an 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy, then they went down Main Street, Roswell, which you can do today. There were multiple eyewitnesses on the 8th/9th time frame that saw the convoy going down Main Street, went right to Hangar P3 Building 84. We know the driver of the truck. We know his name. He's been a hard nut to crack, so he never really spoke about it. But so once they get inside, You've got the offloading. You've got the bodies. You've got the testimony by Glenn Dennis with the child-sized caskets. Building of the large wooden crate in the back of the hangar that was loaded into atomic bomb pit number 1 at the base. And then they had straight flush B-29 taxi over the atomic bomb, but and by way of a hydraulic cylinder, they basically lifted the crate with the bodies into the bomb bay of B-29 straight flush, and then went to 8th Air Force, Fort Worth, Texas. So in a nutshell, that's what we're dealing with. Now, to this day, we're still trying to get evidence on this case. And since the civilians got to the crash site before the military got there, that means that there's civilians to this day in Roswell that still has a piece of memory metal. They have the I-beams. They have the things that Jesse Marcel Sr. had talked about. That's still out there in Roswell right now in the hands of the family members and children from the original crew members who picked up debris, and people who were actually there that were civilians. So I don't know if those things are ever going to come out, because that's a family treasure that's handed down through generations. But you can bet your bottom dollar, since civilians got there before the military, there are some people in Roswell as we speak that still have debris to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I was
They're never
lucky
going to
enough
talk
to.
about it. They're never going to admit to it.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to spend some time in Roswell back in the summer, and I think to see a convoy headed down Main Street, you know, you wouldn't miss it. That's for sure.
No, you wouldn't miss it. You wouldn't miss it.
So it was all of this, the bodies and the debris, was it all taken to Wright Field at the time then? And that kind of leads into my next question, which would be, you know, the Blue Room and the kind of mystery behind that. If you could kind of talk on that.
We do have some evidence that a hastily done autopsy was done at the base hospital. From there, it was flown, the B-29 straight flush, that had debris and some bodies. So some of the bodies were shipped to 8th Air Force, Fort Worth, Texas. But then it appears that all roads lead to Rome. But in this case, all roads lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, because they have the aeromedical lab there, and they have the Foreign Technology Division there. So there's no other better place in the United States, or arguably in the world, where the bodies and the debris could be tested and analyzed. So that's why everything went to Wright Field. That trickles down to the Blue Room. That was essentially confirmed by former presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, who was friends with Curtis LeMay. Barry Goldwater asked General LeMay, you know, I know you guys have a room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where you keep all this stuff. Can I go in there? And he turned to him and said, damn it, Barry, don't you ever ask me that question again, because if you do, I'll have you court-martialed, because I can't even get in there. Very close quote. But so, you know, when you look at all this and you look at the other crash retrieval cases that Leonard Stringfield came up with, what also was shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, there's way too much smoke to be no fire. You know, there's way too many military witnesses coming forward that had firsthand knowledge and dealt with the bodies, the debris, the craft being sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force. Way too many witnesses to be lying. So again, that's what's going to bring this whole field forward. We don't need any more CE1 cases. We don't need any more CE2 cases anymore. There's thousands of sighting cases. That's not going to move it forward. What we need now is the physical evidence and the bodies to be brought within the scientific community as a united coalition. Anything short of that, we're spinning our wheels.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. I mean, do you think that the Blue Room is operational to this day, or is it likely that, you know, this has all moved elsewhere into some other top secret facility?
Difficult to say, but again, you know, what other facility in the United States has what Wright-Patterson Air Force Base has? I challenge anyone to come up with a lab that's more equipped. Now, obviously, Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah is a big player. Eglin Air Force Base is a big player. MacDill Air Force Base is a big player. Edwards North Base Complex is a big player, but I still don't think they hold a candle to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I mean, it has been the location for decades now, for over 7 decades. It's been the number one location. So I believe there's still evidence there to be found. Yes.
Yeah. It leads me. My next question. I actually put some things out on social media, so I got a lot of questions sent in. And
Yep.
you mentioned Leonard Stringfield there, and the Juan asks, "Do you think the MUFON Stringfield archives with original source names will ever be made available to the public?"
Huh. Good question. Well, as of 1991, there were 22 bank boxes of original correspondence letters, like sketches, drawings, dates, names, locations, original correspondence, everything. I was able to speak to a family member 2 years ago, and he told me basically that whatever Leonard wanted published, he had published. The rest of it, I believe, is gone. Now, I can't tell if he was telling me the truth. Maybe he was, maybe he was lying. Maybe they kept it under wraps. But from what I got from him, all of the rest of that stuff is long gone. Now, what MUFON has is the dictation notes, the office management dictation notes, which is comprised of 65 3-ring binders. I looked through that back in 2013, which is very good material, and they're going to make this available in an upcoming release. But even that doesn't include all the names. It includes quite a few of the names, but not all of them. Those original correspondence letters could have been thrown out 20 years ago. I don't know, and no one else knows either. We can't get a handle on exactly what happened to that original material. But there's enough meat on the bones in Leonard's status reports to go on with what we need to go on. There's enough meat on the bones there. We technically don't need the rest of it. It'd be great to have it. We have enough evidence to pursue this forward. We have the names of many of the people within these crash retrievals. And if they're still alive, they could be tracked down, they could be found, they could be subpoenaed. They would be not hostile witnesses, but friendly, cooperative witnesses. And we could have congressional hearings where these people come forward. They tell us about the retrieval operation. And more importantly, they tell us who their bosses were and where the craft and bodies were sent. And then we can send teams in there legally to get this material. That's the best scenario. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. That was supposed to happen with this UAP disclosure legislation. They got axed. So really, we're flying blind now, and it's up to us now. Since that legislation failed, now it has trickled down to the people to find a way to get to this material. And if we don't do it, all of us are going to die, and another 80 years is going to go by, and we're still not going to know. So honestly, this is the final curtain call on disclosure, period, full stop.
Yeah. I mean, am I right in saying that some of Leonard Stringfield's sources were first-hand military witnesses within the programs?
Absolutely, they were. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that almost kind of mirrors what we heard back in the summer of last year with David Grush coming forward saying he found people who worked on the program. What are your thoughts on David Grush's testimony? Do you think that's
I followed David Grush's testimony. Interesting material, but honestly, it's almost like a one-trick pony. Leonard Stringfield, I count on 119 crash retrieval cases. So all of those could potentially lead to witnesses, bodies, debris, craft. So I think it's more powerful than David Grush, really.
Yeah.
And it really hasn't even been covered. I mean, his material has never really made it into the mainstream. It really hasn't. Only people within this field even know who he is, know his name, or know anything about him. Anybody outside, you tell that to people they won't even know who he is. Yet he's the most instrumental person connected to crash retrieval. He got closer than anybody did.
Yeah. I mean, could it be possibly happened that there have been similar crash retrievals in other countries and that we could just suddenly get disclosure from elsewhere?
Absolutely. And, some of the deepest black programs within this government is when we cross international lines and we steal crash retrievals out from under the noses of another country and bring it back here so we can exploit the technology. That went on too. Never going to hear about those cases. Those are the deepest black of the black programs.
And what about the Vatican? What's the White Book? What do they know about this subject?
Yeah. There's another. That's another closely held secret. Within the Stringfield files, there is something. They talk about it. They talk about a yellow book, which is allegedly a historical, basically trickle down timeline of mankind's interaction with ETs over the last 2,000 years. Wow. Now There wasn't much on it. There was a reference to it in the publication, but it is mentioned in the Stringfield files. And knowing what we know about the Vatican, knowing what we've heard about the Vatican archives, that it's off limits to the public, they absolutely do have a section there devoted to this subject matter. They're not going to come forward with it. And who knows what's in there. They allegedly have a craft in there. They've definitely got records, that's for sure. I don't know if they have 8x10 black and white glossy photographs, but there is material to be reviewed at the Vatican for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that would be fascinating to see. I mean, some years ago, you interviewed Dan Barish about Project Aquarius and things like that. So we've had people come forward, but what are your thoughts now on testimony like that so many years later? Does it still hold any weight to you?
Well, I've kind of evolved my thoughts on that particular case. When you look at the evidence, it's interesting. But again, if you think about it, he talks about this facility at S4. Another person talks about this too, and we know who that is. But when you really look at it, if this is true, okay, why don't we have a single F-117 pilot come forward stating that, yes, when we were test flying the F-117, which first flew in 1981, out of Area 51, why haven't we heard one testimony from any F-117 pilot? And it wasn't even made public until 1988. So, for 7 years, it was already flying in there. They eventually moved the operations to Tonopah and then Holloman Air Force Base. But in those early 80 years, this is long before people had come out about this, how come no F-117 pilots have ever come forward stating that there is a remote facility at S4? We flew over it. We saw things from time to time. They never said anything like that. I trust our F-117 pilots. Not one has ever come forward stating or admitting or even claiming that there's a facility there built into the side of the mountain. Not one has ever come forward.
So I'm going to assume by that Bob Lazar, do you not find his story?
I suppose so. But I mean, logically, right? I mean, you've got all these F-117 pilots. They were there for 7 years, long before someone was there. They would be in a position to know because they flew around that whole place at night. We've got, talks of hangar doors being opened up and then craft being rolled out and then test flight. If it's true, how come one of these F-117 pilots have ever come forward? They don't have to say that there was a secret saucer program there or they saw a saucer. They just need to tell us, was there a facility there? They never even said that. They never even mentioned it. Nope. So to me, that's a big piece of the puzzle. That's a huge piece of the puzzle right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, I've got a question here from Eli, and he says, can you speak on the Kingman UFO incident, crash of 53, and the Texas-Mexico border incident of 55?
Interesting. Well, when it comes to Kingman, we have to give credit to Harry Drew. He was the principal investigator in the Kingman UFO, not crash retrieval, but it was a soft landing. Right. Harry Drew is no longer with us, but he was the principal investigator. Now, he claimed to track down people who were involved in the program. And what they described is about a 40-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that came down, soft landing at a slight angle. The reason why it came down is because it went through a radar range that was high-powered. And according to Harry Drew, this radar range was so intense that when birds flew through it, they dropped to the ground immediately. That's how serious this radar range. I mean, they jacked up the power on this thing. So when this craft came down this corridor, somehow it interacted with the craft itself and it made a soft landing. So this wasn't a crash retrieval, it was a soft landing. There were 4 ETs recovered. 3 of them were near the craft. 1 was a little bit further away. And the agreement that the United States military made with these ETs is they agreed to go with the United States military on one condition and one condition only, that they are not separated. So that's the agreement that was made. Now, according to Harry Drew, when military personnel entered this craft, they could only stay in there for about 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes max, because there was some residual force going on inside. and they immediately ran out and threw up all over the ground. This happened twice. They had to take and make an agreement with one of the ETs who, this is all by Harry Drew, and he wrote a book about this. One of the ETs went into the craft, shut it down. Then military personnel were able to go inside. They actually put this on an M123 tank transporter with a cradle. And according to Harry Drew, this is the origin of the Area 51 story. It wasn't with the first test flight of the U-2 spy plane in 55, but in point of fact, a couple of years earlier with this retrieval operation. This is all by Harry Drew. Now, there's been a lot of contention about this because the timeline is the U-2 spy plane was there, and that's the origin of this. Originally, prior to all of this, it was a naval refueling station. That's what Area 51 originally was. Later on, it became something that the CIA started with the U-2. But anyway, that's a side project. So according to Harry Drew, this craft had to get across the river, and it was trying to make it over the Hoover Dam, and they couldn't do it because the outer diameter was too large, and there's light fixtures on that road that takes you across the Hoover Dam.
Right.
So what they did is they went about 200 feet north to a put-in. They had a barge that floated down the river. They took the M123 tank transporter with the disc on top, and I've got this in the presentation. Maybe we can go over it. But anyway, rolled it up onto the barge. They strung cables across the river. This was at night in haste. So there was chaos and yelling and screaming and swearing. And as they were going across the river, the cable snapped and this thing started floating down the river, and it hit the north wall of the Hoover Dam. So being that the Hoover Dam water level is so low today, technically, theoretically, we should be able to see an impact mark where the rim of the craft hit the Hoover Dam. That should be there visible. Who knows? I don't know. I haven't been there close range. I don't know if it's there, but according to Harry Drew, it did make contact. They strung another group of cables across. They were able to get it across, and they went to what is now known Area 51. So in a nutshell, that's Kingman crash retrieval / soft landing. And, you know, there's some evidence to support this because it was only a couple of days prior to that there was a mass sighting over that area. And so, like, their comrades were all in connection there, and they had some fallen comrades. I mean, there was a mass sighting near that time frame. So there does appear to be some evidence to support this case. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's amazing. I've not heard that one. That's fascinating. Just one more question before we get to the presentation. Bear with me, sorry. Got it here somewhere. So Sictanic asks, what does Michael know about the crash in Magdalena, New Mexico?
Magdalena, New Mexico. I don't think I'm familiar with that one. Do we have a date for it?
I don't, unfortunately. No, I'll touch base with him in the future and see if I can find out. No worries.
So this is going to be the beginning slide of this presentation. Retrievals of the third kind, cosmic crashes, corpses, and cover-ups. And we'll just go through these slides here. UFO crash retrievals, the ultimate holy grail of UFO research. Now, why is it called the ultimate holy grail? Well, it's simple. We already talked about it. It's because the crash retrievals contain the bodies, the craft, and the debris. And those are the three key elements that we're going to need to push this field of ufology forward. And as I mentioned before, anything less than those three, and we're not only spinning our wheels, we're going to let another 80 years go by. The government's not going to come forward, and we're all going to die without knowing the truth. So that's why this is the final curtain call on UFO crash retrieval disclosure, because all these legacy cases, these people are dying. There's almost no witnesses left from these old legacy cases of like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. These people are literally on their deathbed. So if we don't take the bull by the horns and make a management decision, we're not going to know the truth. That's what it boils down to. I'm not going to read all these, but I'm just going to break it down to the last group here, where I got this information. Okay, so these are kind of the source material of where Leonard got his information from. So we've got 3-star U.S. Air Force generals. We've got U.S. Air Force fighter pilots, astronauts, commercial pilots, air traffic controllers, neurosurgeons, pathologists, theoretical physicists, and mathematicians, U.S. Army officers, U.S. Navy officers, military police, high-level Pentagon officials, top military brass, scientists and engineers who worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and other government facilities. So these are the caliber of witnesses that Leonard interacted with, where he got his information. And I'll just do number 1 here. The content of each case highlighted in this presentation has remained intact for the description of the original source. Okay, so let's continue on here. A couple of quick quotes. Number 1, UFO crash retrievals can't be real, because if they were, I would have read about it in the local paper. So that's the general public. Number 2, there are not now, nor ever have been, any extraterrestrial visitors or equipment on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is from their official press release from July 1980. So what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to challenge the United States Air Force with the evidence of Leonard's first-hand military witnesses. That's what we're going to do here. So this is Leonard Stringfield. He is the gentleman who coined the term UFO crash retrieval. Over a period of 30 years, he collected dozens, 7 status reports full of these first-hand military sources who dealt with these crash retrieval operations. We'll run through this real quick here. Kind of a biographical sketch. Leonard Stringfield was born 1920, grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Number 2, by the time he graduated from high school in 1939, he had already memorized the entire dictionary. He joined the military as soon as he heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. After the war, he was employed by a chemical company in Ohio and retired after 30 years. Leonard wrote 2 books, Inside Saucer Post 3-0, that was in 1957. Second book, Situation Red, the UFO Siege, 1977. Next point. His lecture on UFO crash retrievals at the 1978 MUFON Symposium in Dayton, Ohio, caused an international sensation. Okay, so why was it an international sensation? Well, number 1, this is the first time this material had been presented in numbers, because he presented a paper that had 12 cases. It was really the first time people heard about it. Roswell was just barely on the radar screen at this time. And the other reason is this was like bombshell information, but Leonard could not reveal his sources, because the agreement he made with his sources that we could maintain an important part of our national history by getting the information out, but the identities of the witnesses had to remain close hold and under wraps. And so that was a point of contention at the MUFON Symposium, because there was no independent third-party way to verify these cases. He couldn't release the names. He passed away in 1994, and this is kind of Leonard's legacy here. Cincinnati Enquirer, July 19th, 1993, says author continues quest for truth about UFOs. Quote, what I've collected has staggering implications for mankind. This would be the biggest thing since Christ, really. Yeah, it is. If these cases are real, we're talking about the biggest thing. All right. Now, Leonard maintained a collection of 22 bank boxes of original correspondence letters. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning. Now, these bank boxes, they may still be around. I can't get access to them. MUFON hasn't been able to get access to the original bank boxes. They do have the 65 3-ring binders, but they don't have the bank boxes. So somewhere out there, this material might still be around and would be useful for congressional hearings tracking these witnesses down. This is the book that I highly recommend. This is UFO Crash Retrievals, all of his status reports in one bound volume by Leonard Stringfield, 1978 to 1994. Now, this is not a cheap book. This is a $100 book. You can get it on Amazon. If you're interested in crash retrievals, all of the interworkings, how many bodies were recovered, where they were sent, the debris, the craft, 18-wheeler lowboys with craft on them being sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, military witness reports. It's all in this publication. It's not for the faint of heart. You have to have a passion for this research. And so looking at this very thick bound volume here, if you get this book, you'll notice that there's virtually no pictures, no sketches, no illustrations, very minimal pictures whatsoever. It is lacking visual aids to make these cases come alive. So about 3 years ago, I decided, you know what? Let's do a crash program and let's see if we can pick out the best cases within this publication, and let's commission a full refined sketch, and then let's go to a full color rendering. And so for the past 3 years, that's what I've been involved in, is committing these to visual aids here. Okay, now let's move on to the next slide. Let's take a trip to Vegas here. Would you go to Las Vegas if you knew the odds were 119-1 in your favor? We can't lose. So if we've got 119 crash retrieval cases and we've got a roulette wheel with 120 spots, we're going to win every time. We almost can't. Well, the odds are in our favor. And I want to make the point that all we need is one of these cases to be authentic, and then the entire government claim that UFO crash retrievals are false completely falls apart. All we need is one, and we got 119. So odds are in our favor. Want to give credit to Rudy Gardea, who's my sketch artist. Definitely want to give him credit. So this is the first one we're going to talk about. Everything here that we're discussing is within the Leonard Stringfield book that I just showed earlier. UFO crash retrieval in 1942. So we're already 5 years prior to Roswell. Roswell was not the first crash retrieval. This is at an Army base north of Georgia that even Leonard didn't know about. This is Leonard Stringfield, crash retrievals, page 319. As we go through some of these cases, I'm going to give you the reference work, the sources, the page number, where you can find the information. This thing was 15 feet basically in diameter, 10 feet high. It had 3 levels. So the upper level, and you can see this in the blow-up enlargement that Rudy had done, was this display panel with buttons and switches and dials and levers. That was the upper level. The mid-deck had what looked like 4 bar stools, and they were positioned just behind this wraparound window. Below that was another section that had an entryway hatch. Now, they also had 4 crew members that were taken alive, and they were about 5 feet tall, 90 pounds, kind of like these oversized head, oversized eyes, and then emaciated long arms that went down below their knees. That's what these witnesses are telling us here. Now, a couple of quick points. When this craft came in, it hit the side of the facility and ripped a hull breach on the side of the craft. That was number one. Number two, the witness in page 319 of the book described hieroglyphic-like writing wrapped around the lower outer circumference of the craft itself. And I've got the blow up here that gives you an idea of what this looked like. Now, I can't say this is exactly what they look like, but the point being is that there was some type of hieroglyphic writing on the outer portion of this craft. So this is 1942. Next one. This is 1946, page 242 to 243. So if you want to get more details, you can just get that book, follow along at page 242. Now, what we're looking at here is Hangar Complex 4. The last one is Bay E, which is on the far right. So I can't prove that it was in this hangar here, but I'm thinking it was probably in this hangar complex. The primary eyewitness was a young boy. His name is Tex Martin. He was 6 years old at the time. His father was a contractor at the base, and they had a connecting cafeteria to this hangar. And so he's in this cafeteria with his father, and there's a janitor that basically buys a Coke for the 6-year-old boy. And as he's drinking this Coke, one gentleman from the inside of this hangar opens up this doorway, walks through, and this young boy is looking inside this hangar. So here's the rough sketch. Kind of gives you an idea of what this may have looked like. He's peering into this hangar, and what does he see? Well, he sees 2 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy trucks with unknown debris with tarps over it. He sees military personnel with rifles. He sees at least 3 ET bodies on the ground, and then approximately an 18 to 20 foot diameter dish-shaped craft off-white with tripod landing gear legs near the bodies. This is what he's describing in this report that you can read about in the book here. This was the first pass rough sketch that I had done with Rudy here. And then we'll go to the refined drawing. And now you can kind of see this whole scene coming into view here. So 20-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. We've got tripod landing gear. This thing was off-white, sitting about 2 to 3 feet off the hangar floor. It had 2 ridges that were wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. And then there were gurneys with ET bodies laying next to the dish-shaped craft. So what we want to do now is we want to take Rudy's drawing, use it as a reference, and then go ahead and commission a full color rendering. And this is what Joel Payne came up with. And that's the goal on all of these cases, to make these cases come alive from the actual eyewitness testimony. So, already we're one in now, and we're prior to Roswell. If you factor in Cape Girardeau, that was 1941. If you factor in the 42 case, and you factor in Battle Los Angeles, now we're 3 and 4 in, and we're still not even to Roswell yet. So this 1946, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which was Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, it had actually not become Wright-Patterson until 1947. Okay, next one. 1946, this is Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. Primary source is a private who worked in records management. And in this case, we're going to divert just in this one case and one case only. This is page 59 from Clark McClellan's book, The Final Frontier, Space, The Final Frontier. And what we're looking at here is a photograph, early photograph of Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. Here's the cover of the book, Space, The Final Frontier by Clark McClellan. And he describes a military witness, and this is the original sketch from the report, who claims to have seen a 15-foot diameter dish-shaped craft at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. It had come in by a railroad flat car from Arkansas back in 1946, November 1946. 7 feet tall. It had a series of rectangular windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. It was highly polished chrome, reflective on the exterior. There was no visible seams, no welds, no fasteners, no Zeus fasteners, no socket head cap screws. It had no hex head bolts, no fasteners of any kind. Like, this thing was done and built on the atomic level by stacking atoms on a 3D printer. That's what this thing looked like. There was a 3-foot diameter column that started at the bottom center of the craft and rose all the way through the center and connected to the top of the craft itself. No beings inside, no seats, no display panels. So let's go to the next drawing here. This is my AutoCAD drawing. I've peeled back the skin on the upper right-hand corner. That gives you an idea what it looked like on the inside here. And again, no rivets, no welds, no seams, no hatches. If you look at the front view, there's a red dot, which is the attempted point of entry. And so what they were doing is they had teams of lab coat technicians who were desperately trying to breach the hull of this craft, and they were using a diamond tip drill bit on one of these transparent windows here, and they couldn't get in. That's the point of this here. So this was the first pass SolidWorks rendering that I put together, basically a preschool illustration very early on, just to get an idea what this thing may have looked like based on the original sketch. And then Joseph Wraith gets credit for this one. He did a really good full color rendering. Now this thing is coming into view. You can see that red dot is still on that front view. And then we've peeled back the skin with that central column. So let's take everything that we have from the original witness sketch and the report. Let's go to Rudy's drawing, which now you can see this in place here. Now, this particular private and records management, he had a friend who was an MP, and he brought him into this hangar because an important letter had to be delivered. And he says, you know what, I got to show you something. So he showed him this craft. It had a tarp that was folded off to the right on the hangar floor. In the foreground, there was a toolbox and an electric drill with a drill bit. So They were absolutely desperately trying to get into this crap. I've got at least two other cases of these diamond tip drill bits that are being used to get in. And I'm certain that these witnesses didn't know each other because they're separated by time and space. So this actually checks off on the boxes that this is actually going on, that they're actually trying to get into these craft, reverse engineer the propulsion system. So let's take Rudy's drawing as a guide, and let's go to a full color rendering. And this is what Joseph Wraith came up with. So if we were there back in 46, we may have seen something that looked just like this. It may still be there to this day, or it may have moved to another location. But my senses are telling me that I'm sure they still have assets at Wright-Patterson to this day as we speak. Okay, next one. This is Papagos Indian Reservation west of Globe, Arizona, January 1947. This is near the vicinity of the Superstition Mountains. Page 93, case A10. Primary witness served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. So that is the source material of where I got this information. So we've got two military personnel. They're driving down this unimproved area, and they run across two MPs with rifles, telling them to stop immediately, get out of here. You're not allowed to be in this area. You don't have authorization to be here. Another 100 feet down this unimproved area off to the left, they see this 30-foot diameter disc-shaped craft came in at a 40-degree angle. It had what looked like indented sections wrapped around the outer circumference. There were two rings that also wrapped around the outer circumference. There was a dome on top, and they're seeing all. They can't believe what they're seeing. They're told to get out of here immediately. It's in the book, so if you want to get more information, it's talked about in this book. So let's go to the full color rendering here, and this may have been what it looked like. And you can just imagine, this is still prior to Roswell here. Imagine coming across this, having a barely a glimpse at it, and then within a minute told to get out of here. This is something that would burn in your memory. You would remember this. And this is what these military witnesses are telling us, that they're seeing, they're participating in, they're retrieving the bodies in the craft, and they're being sent to these military locations all around the United States. This is what the military witnesses are telling us here. Next one, White Sands Missile Range, July 4th, 1947. So now we're finally getting into the time frame of Roswell here. This is a technical sergeant, U.S. Army Air Force, page 196. Now, what I've got here is the perimeter of White Sands Missile Range. That gives you an idea where this thing came down here. And this is what the witness had talked about within this book. Now, this entire operation took place at night. The craft was about 150 feet in diameter, so we're talking about a massive ship here, much larger than Roswell. Now, this whole thing was excruciatingly well lit up. So they had light owls, they had searchlights, they had spotlights shining on this thing. They had people with Geiger counters walking around it. They had people with still cameras. They had motion picture film cameras going on. So you know that they've got evidence of this. All this was recorded. So they've got 8x10 black and white glossies. They've got motion picture film reel. That's what we're talking about here. And if I go to the next slide, we'll go to the full color rendering. This may have been what it looked like during this retrieval operation. I mean, can you imagine coming across this and getting all the information, getting the documented evidence, getting the photographic evidence, all the film reels? I'm sure they took more than one film reel. What about the Geiger counter results and all those reports? All of this stuff would exist associated with this particular case. Now, what's the actionable item here? Since still photography and motion picture film was recorded of this event, senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances should track down and utilize this evidence for future public hearings. Yeah, it needs to happen like yesterday. Yeah. Because if these people aren't tracked down, they're going to pass away, and we'll have no idea what has been going on the last 80 years. And in the minds of the government officials who are controlling the flow of access to this material with the defense contractors, it will absolutely be cover up complete. because there's no advantage for them coming forward. So in their eyes, it's cover up complete. That's why it's so urgent and pressing upon us in the public, researchers, people who are truly interested in this. That's why it's so urgent for us to track down these remaining witnesses. Obviously, we're going to have to do this on our own. We've already tried the democratic process here. I feel it has failed. We've been trying for 80 years and it has failed. So obviously, we're at a point where we need to take matters into our own hands. We need to take the bull by the horns. We need to find these people, find their bosses, get to the retrievals, get to the craft and bodies. Then we're going to move. This is not going to be an easy undertaking. This is going to be like the most difficult thing, but we have no choice. There is no other options here. Okay, next one. 1947 crash retrieval. Scene of all places at a warehouse at Berkeley. Believe it or not, Albert Bruce Collins, now deceased, is the witness. He was a metallurgical engineer. This is page 197 in the book. So he's at the right place at the right time at Berkeley when this 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy backs in. Let's go to Rudy's drawing here, and this is what this gentleman described. A 30-foot long egg-shaped craft up on the hangar. So we got this white lab coat technician with a clipboard, notebook clipboard. He sees this thing. He said that there was a hole breach on the side of the craft that looked like a cracked egg. On the forward part of this cracked egg was a composite panel or bulkhead. In the center of the cracked egg, there was a 3-foot diameter central yoke, you could call it, and there was another composite panel that wrapped around the outer circumference of this yoke. He said that there were 2 bands wrapped around this craft, and then at the lower right, it looked like there was an implosion, and there was shrapnel coming out of this right-handed implosion. This is what this witness is describing here. Now, let's go to the full-color rendering based on this sketch. And this is what Joel came up with. So here's another thing that we could try. It's going to be difficult to smuggle out a 30-foot egg, right? But if we could get a piece of the debris that this metallurgical engineer had examined, which I'm sure pieces of it are probably still there, at least some pieces, maybe we could get one to slip out somewhere, and that could be brought into the scientific community. That would be a lot easier than trying to take possession of this whole crap, because we're not going to be able to do this with a frontal approach. You can't go in with guns blazing. You got to come in through the back door, and we need to use intelligence, and you need to use discernment as how we're going to crack this case. Not through the frontal approach, but kind of a backhanded intellectual approach is going to be our best effort here. All right, next one. Carrot Patch, south of Salinas, California, July, August 1940s. This is an obscure case that's almost never talked about. The 2 primary witnesses were young teenage boys. They were 19 at the time. The foreman had alerted them the morning after, because the thing came down the night of. So the next morning they came out to work. These 2 19-year-old boys were alerted by the foreman, and he said, you know what, guys, you need to come over here and take a look at this. And what they saw, this is the original sketch from the report, a 9-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It has a flat section on the top. There were 2 rows of indented, what looked like windows wrapped around the outer circumference. They weren't transparent, but they were indented. They were double rows and about 4 feet tall. So this is kind of a smaller craft. This is the map that came with the report. X marks the spot. So if you look off to the left, you've got Highway 1, you've got Monterey, you've got Carmel, and then you've got Gonzales. So that's where this craft came down, not too far from the 101 here. So we could theoretically get probably within an eighth of a mile of where this came down. Now, I don't think there's anything there. They didn't any debris, but we could even today get within probably an eighth of a mile where this craft came down. So this was the first passed AutoCAD drawing that I put together. Gives you an idea of what this thing actually looked like. Here's the first attempt at drawing this thing in full color. And then here's Rudy's much more advanced, refined drawing. So within about 10 minutes of the 2 19-year-old witnesses getting to and actually kicking the side of this thing with one of their boots, A military convoy got to the scene. They had at least one Jeep. There was a 6x6 troop transport with a trailer connected. They were successful in bringing the craft onto the trailer, and they shipped it out of here immediately. Now, the two witnesses were told to vacate the area, but they got a good view of this entire operation about an eighth of a mile away. So, they didn't miss anything. They saw the entire operation. So let's see if we can take this drawing and commit it to a full color rendering. And this is what we came up with my friend Joel. I want to give him credit, Joel Payne. And this is based on the witness testimony and the sketch. This is as close as we can get to the retrieval operation. So now we're already 5 or 6 in. The body count keeps going up. The craft count keeps going up, and it's clear that they have diversified their portfolio. They're not going to keep everything at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They are going to have their assets spread throughout this country at military asset locations, so that if anything gets bombed or there's a fire or there's an earthquake, they don't lose all their crown jewels. They have absolutely diversified their portfolio. Okay, next one. Pentagon, 1952. This is in an off-limits room. This is page 152, case 1. Now, this was an office worker who went down to what we believe to be the basement at the Pentagon. They absolutely have a basement where they keep classified material, files, photographs, film reels. There's probably multiple rooms here. Anyway, she goes into this off-limits room. It's dark, it's dingy. There's some boxes nearby. You can read about the report here. And she kind of makes a 180-degree turn, and she sees a pickled alien in a glass jar. Best way to describe it. So here is what she actually saw. Within 5 seconds of her seeing this ET in a glass jar, this military police officer grabs her arm, tells her to get out of here immediately. So she actually had to sign papers not to discuss it, but we have her testimony on file as well. Something that may have looked like this. This is by Joseph Rake. I want to give him credit for that one. Next one, Camp Polk, Louisiana, summer 1953. This is a private in the Army. His name is Herman Johnson. Case A1, page 80. So this is the sign getting into the facility here. What this person described is an egg-shaped craft that came down. He saw the entire operation, about 30 feet across, just like that Berkeley craft. Yeah. There was a fin still rotating, kind of wrapped around the outer portion of the craft itself. Now, there were 3 ET bodies that came out that were helped by the aid of medical personnel. Another 4th body was pulled out in a stretcher, and there was some type of communication going on between the comrades that came out of the hatchway and the one that was being carried away. They were trying to communicate to their fallen comrades. That's talked about in this particular case report. Now, these beings were about 3.5 feet tall. They had oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose. They were wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. They had a helmet on top. They were wearing mittens, believe it or not, but looked like gloves or mittens. And then the report said that these beings, when they walked, they didn't have a knee joint. They only moved by their hip joint. So it was this bizarre, staggered, stair-step type movement. So in this drawing here by Rudy, you can see them coming out of the hatchway, and then the one in the stretcher is being carried over to the ambulance truck. So let's see if we can do a full color rendering here. And now we're zooming into this scene. According to the military, there's a good 3-page report on this. Very good reading for anyone who's interested. Zoom in a little bit closer now. You can see them coming out of the hatchway with the helmets on. We've got the mittens on, the one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. Next one here. Now we've got the comrade being carried off into the ambulance truck, and then we'll do one more zoom in here. So we've got 4 ETs associated with this particular crash retrieval operation. Next one. Wright Field, this is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, 1953. This is an Army Reserves warrant officer. His name is Michael Olvey. Page 15, abstract number 8. So in this particular case, we have hangar complex number 4, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I believe it was this particular hangar. I can't prove it, but I believe it was this particular hangar. So what we have, I'm going to do a blow up. I've actually been inside this hangar. It's large enough to accommodate this particular case.
Right.
There was a 4-engine DC-7 cargo plane. Looks very similar to this, that taxied up onto the tarmac at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so imagine this scene inside the hangar. Once it taxied up onto the tarmac, it went right into the hangar. The hangar door shut, and then there's an aft cargo bay door that opened up. This is all inside the hangar, and they had a forklift, and they were offloading pallets of wooden crates. And this warrant officer mentioned in this report was standing like 12 feet away when this forklift offloaded this pallet of crate, and there was 3 crates on top with their lids pulled off. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. And he got a real good look inside these crates. And what he described were 3 ET bodies. They had oversized heads, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose. One was female, all wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit, and they were all suspended off the bottom of these wooden crates by a white netting to protect them from the dry ice freezer burn below. He was also told about the other boxes that were offloaded from this craft, and those were the debris from the crash retrieval. So he was given some slight details about what else they retrieved from this operation. Let's go to Joseph's drawing here. This is the full color rendering. So you've got the boxes in the background. You can see the steam from the dry ice coming from the bottom of these crates. And this is what this military personnel had told Leonard Stringfield. It's in the book now. So if this gentleman is still alive, and I don't know how to find him because we're looking at him decades ago now, he might be gone or he might still be alive. That's why we need the general public's help to track these people down. He might know exactly what happened to these bodies. Maybe they stayed at Wright-Patterson. Maybe they were moved. Who knows? But he may have had a need to know. And we can also drill down on the debris and crash artifacts that were recovered as well. Here's top view looking down. May have looked something like this. Now, I want to mention this. He mentioned that one of these beings, in his assessment, was female because it had breasts. This is mentioned in the report. So if anyone wants further details, they can read about it within Leonard's report. Next one, Walker Air Force Base. This is New Mexico, April 12, 1954. Primary source served in the Air Force from 1954 to 1955. This is page 82. Now, I want to state up front that Walker Air Force Base used to be Roswell Army Airfield, home of the 509th Bomb Group. So we're talking about the same facility, but just years later it was renamed Walker Air Force Base. Yeah. Primary source was playing ping pong when 3 other of his, now he was a photographer, he was an expert in cameras and photography. He and 3 other personnel, so we had 4 crew members total plus the pilot, they get into this H-19 helicopter. And there's a message that comes across the audio system within the helicopter that's directed to the crew members in the crew compartment here with the windows that you see. Yeah. And the gentleman says, "Men, this is not a drill. This is a code red operation," something similar to that. So this was not a training operation. This happened at night. So they take off. They head north of Roswell. The highway is to their right. And they make a left-hand turn. They're heading northwest now. And when the helicopter gets to where they need to go, they see this. This is a 40 to 50 foot diameter disc-shaped craft. Came down at a 40-degree angle. It had a dome on top. There were multicolored lights that were wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself that were still rotating when they got there. Our primary eyewitness was ordered to open up the doorway and start taking photographs with a still camera. There was a spotlight that was shining down on the scene. There were 4 bodies associated with the retrieval operation, and then later on he found out that there were 2 more bodies recovered inside the hatchway that he didn't see originally. So there were 6 bodies associated with this craft. Now, when he landed, 2 important things happened. The very second he landed and got out of the helicopter, he said that the entire localized vicinity of where this came down reeked of automobile battery acid. It had this strange ammonia battery acid smell. He also noticed that by this time, other troops, other trucks, other convoys and jeeps started approaching. So, like, this whole retrieval operation is in full swing now. We talked about the hatchway. There was a small box associated with this retrieval operation, and the ground crew that was telling this photographer to stay closer than 40 feet. The ground crew that was ordering this photographer to stay away, one of those ground crew members threw up right in front of this photographer. So he mentioned that in this report too. So maybe that was something that was associated with the bodies. We don't know for sure, but the bottom line is that this whole area smelled like battery acid, which comes up in a couple other retrieval operations. Here's the full color rendering that Joel Payne came up with. I want to give him credit. So again, you can see what this would look like and the kind of photography that they would have of these things. I mean, we're talking about high res, close up photographs. They're hovering 40 feet above this thing. So it's not like they're 3 miles away. They are literally feet above this thing. Whatever photographs they took would be quality. They would be high resolution. They'd be highly classified. They're somewhere in some vault to this day. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, 1955. We'll do a couple more here. This has to do with Mrs. G. She worked in the Foreign Materials Division, and this is provided by Charles Wilhelm. This is page 17 within the book. So just to give an idea, she was in this large warehouse, and according to Mrs. G, what her job was to catalog 1,000 components that came in from a crash retrieval operation. So that's like a huge, bold statement. We're talking about 1,000 pieces that came in from a crash retrieval. So we can't have these senators and congressmen tell us that they don't have any evidence. What's actually going on is they don't have a high enough security clearance, and they're not read in or briefed on these programs. They can't get to it. So maybe they are telling us the truth in their eyes. Something similar to this here. This is operations building 258. And again, she's cataloging 1,000 components. So I talked to my friend Rudy. I go, Rudy, let's get a period correct office worker. Let's get some shelving off to the side. And the way they had this thing set up, and we're going to go to the next slide here. This is Rudy's drawing. They had this thing set up like an assembly line. There was one gentleman, when the debris came into the warehouse where our primary witness was sitting, this is Mrs. G in the foreground to the right. And one guy would take a photograph of this. There was a next station where they bagged it and tagged it. Then they went over to Mrs. G's desk. She cataloged it, and then they had another person that put all this shelving on here. So you've got this Indiana Jones scene here, Raiders of the Lost Ark closing scene. Now, while all this is going on, she said that there was a gurney that came by on wheels. There were 2 ET bodies being preserved in this formaldehyde preservation fluid. She said that these were going right by her desk. She got a good look at them. So let's go to the next slide. And before we do that, I want to give you the direct quote. This is what Mrs. G said. She said, quote, "Uncle Sam can't do anything to me once I'm in my grave." 6 months later, she died. Wow. So we got her testimony just in time. Now, I don't know about you, but I tend to trust this particular. Why would she lie? Why would she lie? What advantage she knew she was only months away here. So she just let it all hang out. And I'm glad. She represents our heroes in this country. So here's Joel's rendering of what this scene might look like. Now, if you look off to the left, you've got all these ET artifacts and components that may have come in. You can see the photographer taking these photographs. And then off to the right, you've got Mrs. G who's cataloging this. And then you've got this gurney with these ET bodies. This may be something of what it looked like back the time in 1955 when she was actually here. So actionable items. Since over 1,000 components of physical ET hardware exist, this evidence should be tracked down by senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances and should be presented in open public congressional hearings. Yeah, this is something that needs to happen immediately. All right, let's do another one here. December 1963, Cherry Point, North Carolina. This is a U.S. Marine. His name is Roy Baker. If anyone can find this guy, please let me know. This is page 152, case 2. So again, Cherry Point, North Carolina. I've got the map here that shows you where this is. So this Marine is told to board a plane with blacked out windows. And he flies 3 hours by plane from Cherry Point, North Carolina to an undisclosed location. He didn't know where it was. When he gets there, they open up these hangar doors. And so he's looking in this hangar. He sees what looks like a fat hamburger, 40-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that was 15 feet tall. It had what looked like opaque windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself, chrome polished aluminum exterior, no visible means of propulsion, no seams, no welds, no fasteners, no socket head cap screws. He did see the very faintest outline of a hatchway, and he said that this hatchway was so fully integrated into the skin of the craft itself, you could not put a razor blade in this seam. The red dots that you see on this drawing, these are the attempted point of entry with a diamond tip drill bit. So they were desperately trying to get in. You match this up with the case from 46. Now we've got 2 instances of these diamond tip drill bits that are being used. And this is all within the Stringfield reports. Here's Joseph's full color rendering. Again, no visible means of propulsion, no seams, no rivets, no fasteners. Here are the 3 attempts that they used to get in. Number 1, diamond tip drill bits. Failed. It didn't work. Then they used an acetylene torch. That failed. They also used a laser. Now, there's been some controversy that they didn't have lasers back in 63. Yes, they did. They weren't the most high intensity, but they did have lasers back in 1963. So that was the 3rd attempt, and that failed as well. Now, this is sort of a world exclusive. This is the original sketch by the Marine himself, Roy Baker. I'm just going to break this down real quick. So if you look to the left and right upper hand corners within this facility, the whole place was excruciatingly well lit. So there were no shadows. This craft was being propped up off the floor by scaffolding about 5 feet tall. You could walk under this thing. So they had this thing propped up by scaffolding. They had a catwalk where you could walk around this thing. And then if you look here on the bottom of this craft, you've got these dark marks. Those are pads that was supporting the craft, cradling it on this catwalk section. And then if you look on the second to the left window, you've got that black dot there. That's one of these portions where they were trying to enter with the diamond tip drill bit. So rough sketch, but this is an original from the U.S. Marine back in 1963. Here's Michael Johnstone's slightly refined drawing. He interviewed the Marine back in 1986. I ended up interviewing Michael Johnstone. It's been about 10 years now. So we've got his testimony as well. Okay, so here's my final AutoCAD drawing. He also mentioned, if you look at this detailed view I've done, that there was a 1-inch lip between the outer skin of the craft itself and the outer portion of these opaque windows. Directly below this craft on the hangar floor, there was a taped off circle, white in color. His job was to guard that craft for a period of 2 weeks. We'll do a couple of the bullet items here. Craft was seen at an undisclosed military location 3 hours by plane from Cherry Point, North Carolina. One more here. The entire craft was surrounded with what looked like standard military aircraft scaffolding. So here is Joseph Ray's full color rendering. I want to give him credit. You can see these lab coat technicians. You've got the catwalk. We've got, some very advanced scaffolding. You can see the diamond tip drill bit sections where they were trying to get in, and you've got this indented section here with the skin of the craft and the outer portion of the opaque windows. Now, let me take you through this hangar facility here. This was the first pass illustration by John McNeil. Once they failed with the acetylene torch, they brought in 2 tractor trailers with these electrical generating devices. They fed these heavy, thick gauge cables into the hangar that was used to power the laser. And when they moved the laser away, it was warm to the touch, but had otherwise no effect on the craft whatsoever. Here you've got the scaffolding here. So this was like the first pass getting this thing into view here to preserve an important part of our national history. Now I want to take you into the facility like we're a fly, and we've covertly entered the chain link fence, and we're going to penetrate the interior of this hangar here. So now we're through, and we're flying into the hangar now. And now we've got these military personnel. You've got the white lab coat technicians. He talked about this whole place was like excruciatingly well lit. So that checks out. There were some spook group CIA type guys there. We'll zoom in a little bit closer. Now you can see the lips on the craft itself with the outer portion of the skin and the opaque outer section of these opaque windows. This is a 45-degree look down angle. Now you can see this white taped off section. And his basic duty for 2 weeks was to guard this thing and shoot to kill anybody who would breach that circle. All right, next. Now, the last day that he was there, he said that there was a 18-wheeler tractor trailer with a cradle device, and they were moving it off of its scaffolding onto this cradle device, and they were building this structure around it with tarps, moving it to the other location. So here's this cradle section. We've got the tarps being sort of covering the craft at this point. We're about 50% covered now. We'll move on to the next slide. We're almost 100% completely covered. We're getting ready to ship it to the next location. So what they've done here, the way they keep the secret for all these decades is, number one, they compartmentalize this information. So like there's no large groups of people that know the whole story. There's these minute fragments of people, very small groups at the very top. And the other thing is they keep moving assets from one location to the next. So no one can keep any tabs on this. These guys are good. They're geniuses. This was Rudy's first attempt at drawing what this may have looked like during one of these moving operations. So getting back to this laser, according to the witness from 63, he said that when they put the laser on the craft, it bounced off the reflective exterior, hit the ceiling panel, and damaged the ceiling panel.
Wow.
Which actually, according to him, this actually did take place. We've got his drawing here. This is an illustration that shows you what this may have looked like. It actually caused physical damage on the upper ceiling section of the facility here. Here's the drawing that shows you, according to Marine, how this all went down with the laser. You can see the damage here. And then he also mentioned that there were color-coded badges. So if you had a green badge, you could go in this part of the facility. If you had a yellow badge, you could go to another part of the facility. If you had a red badge, you had access to the whole facility. So that's something that pops up again and again in these retrieval operations where we have these lab coat technicians. They have these color-coded badges. Now, I want to talk about one time that he was in this facility. He was left completely alone in this facility. And his job was to frisk people, because he was a guard, frisk people as they entered this facility where this craft was. One day he was left alone and nobody frisked him. So he snuck in a pocket Minox camera. He took a photograph of this thing. And I have his direct quote here. Quote, "Someday I will tell this story and by God, people are going to believe me." Unfortunately, that photograph was lost in a flood back in 83. So we were so close to getting this evidence, but it was lost in a flood. So I talked to Joseph Wraith, my friend. I want to give him credit. I said, you know what? Let's see if we can turn back the hands of time let's do a replica. What would this Minox camera photograph look like if we could do our best replica? And this is what he came up with. Something that looked very similar to this. A little bit grainy, a little bit brown, off color, almost black and white, blurry, but something similar to this was at one time within this guy's grasp, but we lost it. So we were this close of getting it. Okay, now I want to mention this gentleman, Paul Neitz, United States Secretary of the Navy, 63 to 67. That's the time frame where this Marine was guarding the craft, because this was December 1963. Now, he said that in this report, there was a Secretary of the Navy who almost breached that white circle tape on the floor, and he almost got shot. So it would have been this guy, according to the math. It would have been this gentleman. So it'd be interesting to find out any files if this gentleman had any connection or knowledge of this, or if there's any paperwork associated with this particular case. Now, I want to mention 4-star Major General Melvin F. McNichol, Base Commander, Tinker Air Force Base. Here's his obituary. Daly, Oklahoma, July 11th, 1986. Ex-Tinker Commander Melvin McNichol dies. Why is he important in the story? Well, he was friends with Charlotte Mann, who had a corresponding interest in UFOs, just like the general did. So these two were friends. And so she approached the general and said, you know what, General? We've been friends for years. We have this coincidental interest in UFOs. You've never told me anything. You've never said anything. You know, can you tell me something? Can you throw me a bone? Can you tell me something? So he turns to Charlotte and says, Charlotte, if you ever repeat what I'm about to tell you, number one, I'll deny it. And number two, it could end my career. He told her 3 things. Number one, he saw a UFO which was located in the West. That checks out because this Marine said that he boarded a plane from Cherry Point, North Carolina, flew 3 hours by plane. That puts you within the West. So that box is checked. Number 2, he said he walked around a UFO on a catwalk, which was propped up by scaffolding. This is exactly what the Marine said, that he guarded a craft that was propped up by scaffolding and they built a catwalk. Number 3, this general told Charlotte Mann that bodies were recovered and one was still alive. This is interesting because the U.S. Marine who guarded the craft for 2 weeks, he overheard water cooler talk by these white lab coat technicians talking about bodies being recovered and one was still alive. When I heard this statement from Charlotte Mann, what she had heard from Melvin McNichol, I knew I had a case now, because I'm sure that she didn't know this Marine. I don't think this general knew this Marine, but we had independent confirmation because they both described virtually the identical points removed from time and space. So I'm thinking we do have a legitimate case here. So I just wanted to go over a couple of the cases. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but this is just kind of a quick review of some of the crash retrieval cases, and certainly want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you today.
Oh, that was absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate it. Michael, where is the best place where people can go and see any more of your presentations, slideshows, and images?
Yep, I have a YouTube channel called Michael Schratt. That's it. You can just type in my name and my videos will pop up. I am on Twitter, which I guess is now X. And my goal here is to just get this information out. I'd like to get feedback. We want to try to find these, track down these witnesses so we can get to this evidence before it's too late, because this is our history. If we don't do something now, we're going to lose an important part of our national history, and we just can't let that happen.
Completely agree. I really do. And I'll make sure that all your links are in the description of this video.
Cool.
But Michael, thank you so much. I really appreciate it for your time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks a lot. Yep. See you.
Bye-bye now.